You're listening to the Men After God podcast, the show dedicated to empowering men to navigate life's challenges through the lens of faith. In this episode, we'll tackle real-world issues that matter, from leadership and personal growth to marriage, fatherhood, and balancing career and family. Join us as we explore insightful conversations and practical advice to help you thrive as a man after God's own heart.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Men After God podcast. I am looking forward to today's episode as it's an area where every one of us as men with families need work in, need help in. And I've met very few that I look at and go, man, they have mastered this. And you know what I find? I find that when I see someone like that, they would say they haven't mastered it. They've probably just mastered an area I'm really, really bad at. And we're going to be talking about today about how to be a spiritual leader in your home. And I'm excited about being able to have a couple conversations around it as growing up in a family with step parents and different things of that nature. And then Luke's situation is unique. And it's just going to be an amazing perspective that we're going to bring to the table today. Luke, when it comes to spiritual leadership in the home, like what is something you think about as like first thought, first thing that comes to mind when those words are said?
Well, I think that when it comes down to leadership is more of an example and an attitude than most anything. So I think that when it comes to spiritual leadership, what I think about it in general is I know what it should be is how I live. But when I think about it, I think about the big King James Bible pulled out and the dad.
I got a big one. It's a CSB though.
Yeah.
So like, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this.
You're right.
This ain't my old black book.
Yeah. The old concept, the family Bible comes out and it just, somebody reads and everyone sings. And I grew up in a family in which we did a lot of family devotions, and we were a large family. We basically had church at home most days. Like, there was a time we did home church, but the concept is just a lot of times it's the almost a stigma of, I have to be dressed up in a suit and tie and leading my family in a worship setting. And it's not that you can't, because I've seen that work and I respect that, but I don't do that. And I think what it comes down to is the simplicity of doing something at all is better than doing nothing at all. But most times we just do the easy part of like, well, that's a lot of work, so I'm going to do something different and take my kids to a one on Wednesday night and call that devotions. And there we are. There
you go. Man, I love that. But man, Luke said it, something's better than nothing. We're the ones that's been charged with this. Mm-hmm. Moses in Deuteronomy 6:6-7, he says, these words that I am giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your city gates. The law that Moses was giving, guys, so important for us to communicate about and to share with our children. And it doesn't just mean the law of the Old Testament. We're going to talk about Christ, talk about Jesus, the things of Christianity, a biblical worldview on the things that are happening around us. I mean, it was just a month ago that we had a presidential election. And so how did you approach that with your kids? Was it with a biblical worldview? And I know, man, we're not going to get into politics today, but it was interesting to watch both sides of the aisle just thanking God and the others asking why God, and that's a whole deal. But it's something your kids are growing up in. Are you approaching those topics with them from a biblical worldview? Because truthfully, Luke, that's not like a formal teaching moment. But I think you and I both agree. Our kids, we learn better and more from the informal moments of life than we do those formal moments.
Yeah, I would say, I think, if we go to Ephesians chapter 5:1-2, it talks about being imitators of God as beloved children and walk in love as Christ loved us. In context of us being the example and just like showing, a lot of people aren't going to read the Bible, but they will read us. And our children especially, they may not even listen to the times we talk about the Bible, but they read how we're reacting to different things. And so even in regards to hard times or how we responded to the election, how we responded to those that were on the opposite side of the aisle of the election to us, our children are watching that. And they're going to emulate. It's interesting. Like I teach kids classes at church and I can see what's going on at home in the kids' lives. You say, well, I don't know what's going on. I just know that there's something going on based on their reaction, the words they use, how they interact with each other, how they interact with authority. Because obviously there's a behavior that's being modeled at home that the kids are going to follow. You say, well, I didn't model that behavior. I didn't even mean to. Well, they're going to model the behavior that you act, not the behavior that they say they should act as. And so it's like the do as I say, not as I do. That doesn't work with children. And it certainly doesn't work with devotions or in that concept of leading the family spiritually. It's an action, it's behavior. It's a conversation such as the day-to-day of how they responded to someone at school, how they responded to authority, how they responded to the news cycle. I've got very young kids, but they know what's going on in the election. And by the way, they're very opinionated about it. I didn't tell them how to be opinionated. They just already have made up their belief based on what they're seeing within the home, outside the home, in their school, their classes. So be the example, but be imitators of God.
Absolutely. Inside the home is so important, but one thing as men we have to protect is the influences from outside the home and you in your circle of friends and things of that nature. Now, I'm not telling you to go find a commune of everyone who thinks and believes and acts and dress just like you. However, understand that the people you're around often is going to influence your children, and be sure you want their influence in their lives. And as men, we've got to be willing to say, you know what? I don't. And we're not going to hang out there. Because John Piper once said, a man's greatest duty is to teach his family the ways of God. And man, we're all going to do that differently. And one of the most simple ways that gets talked about is family devotions. Luke already mentioned that, and there was a time in history over the last 100 years of conversations around the family altar, and songs being sung, Bible being read, prayers being offered, and maybe even on your knees in the living room with the big family Bible open and different things of that nature. Nothing wrong with that. However, most don't do that. Research in 2020 shows that only 36% of Protestant parents read the Bible with their children regularly. Now, Luke, let's talk for a minute about regularly. I loved how before we got on here, you were talking about it, a resource that you had and what they were saying of, the regularity. It's not the same for everybody. Dive into that.
Yeah, I've got a friend, a missionary. He's a missionary, but he works for a ministry called Family Time Training. Dr. Cole Sandlin. He's out of Colorado. I'd highly recommend them. We'll put in the resource if we get a chance. But their ministry is to go in and ultimately provide resources for young families to start wherever they're at. Meaning that if you got teenagers, young kids, or just the very young kids, and their goal is to help facilitate some version of do something that teaches biblical values through the Bible, and teaching Jesus at a young age, so that the children can start to adapt the values aspect of what the Bible teaching and know it's from the Bible. It's not just some like, okay, here's a book of rules, but no, this is the Word of God. And their ministry is designed to, if I can get someone to do devotions once a week with their family, that's huge. If we can't do once a week, can we do once a month? If we can't do once a month, can we do it sometime where there's something going on, where the father, the leader of the family, if you would, is leading devotions and modeling it, that this is important, and it's important enough to prioritize, to put on the schedule, to make it happen, to put the resources behind it. Because here's the deal. We all know what it's like to watch someone who prioritizes football on Sunday. Get back. And I think it's great. I think family time is great, but it's amazing how we'll prioritize things in our lives, and what we worship, whether we call it worship or not, our kids know. So it might be video games. It might be football. It might be just the TV show that you're watching. It might be work. But if you want to worship and emulate this in the devotions, it's going to be priority. It's going to be in the schedule where someone knows this is the family time. And I don't think that there's a right or wrong way to do it other than to not do it. Meaning that if you don't do it, you're doing it wrong. If you do it, just start somewhere, then guess what? There's a start, and everyone starts at start. And that's the opportunity we have, is look like, hey, if I can't do it every day, and I don't even know that I'd recommend to do it every day, just because of all of the stuff, like do your own devotions as needed, but as a family, make it impactful when it does happen versus checking a box and just kind of moving through it. Otherwise, your kids are going to read that as well. We'll worship football, but we're not going to worship God.
I love that, man. I heard a story one time about a man who had his pastor come visit. They were sitting there talking in the living room and stuff, and they started talking about the Bible. And the man looks over at his son and says, "Hey, go get the Bible." And he says, "Well, which one? Which one is that?" The man looks at his son and says, "Well, it's the one Dad always reads." Young child goes over, comes back in, hands the dad a Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
And now he's embarrassed in front of the pastor. But that was what he thought his dad always read, because that's what he saw. And so remember, they are going to model what they see, guys. So I have the fault, if you will. I do a lot of my stuff on my phone. And I've asked my kids, I asked them one time, I said, hey, you know I'm doing more than playing games on here, right? Like this isn't just like Clash of Clans and Candy Crush or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no. I'm like, oh, that's a problem. And after that, I had to talk to them about the devotions that I had. And, again, I don't talk to them about it all the time, but I try to have those. And one tip, guys, I used to do, my kids were into Percy Jackson. And so I had read those books. And when we'd go to bed at night, we would read, I would read from Answers in Genesis had 5-minute Bible stories. So we would read one of those. And then I'd grab Percy Jackson, and that's kind of what we would read after. And everyone can have their own opinions about that. I don't care. It was a great time with our family. But we went through the Bible, we talked about it, we prayed, and then I'd read Percy Jackson for a bit, and then we'd go to bed. You say, why not the other? Well, some nights I did, because if you know anything about me, I like to switch it up sometimes. But going through those was great. And then use age appropriate materials. Man, I bought a 365-day dinner time devotional for families, and it was a great resource, except my kid was 6, and the content was for like a 10 to 12-year-old. And so some people, Luke, you said you work with children, so I mean, you could probably grab something and make it applicable to kids. And some of you parents out there, you might feel as though like, I can't break this down into childhood language or something. Hey, that's okay. Find something that's already in that childhood language and read it. And this is the one, Luke, I want to toss it back to you about the discussion piece with the older kids. But a lot of parents, a lot of men, I'm afraid that you're afraid to lead a devotion or read scripture and talk to your kids about it because you don't understand it. Or at least that's what you tell yourself. Right. Now, first off, you didn't grow up in a Christian home. You haven't been to Bible college. Your devotional life up until this point has been absolutely atrocious. You've read the front cover of the Bible, and that's about it. Hey, listen, again, you got to start somewhere and be open and honest with your kids when you start. Hey, listen, Dad's new to this thing too, but God's important in our lives. We're going to start Genesis 1. We're going to go to John and learn about Jesus. We're going to go to Acts, learn about the church, and we're going to do this together. And that's why it's important to have open discussion and questions and stuff. And look, that really applies as the kids get older.
Yeah, I would say this. I think that, and my parents, couple thoughts on that. My parents modeled it in a way where they still, even to this day, they're up at 4:35 in the morning doing devotions, but personal devotions, meaning that my parents are still doing it. But they've done that for as long as I've known them, for as long as they got up early, and they incentivized us as young children from the time I was 3, 4, 5, 6. If we got up early to read our Bible, whatever aspect of Bible reading we did at a very young age, we got to get our own cup of hot chocolate and sit down and have a morning Bible time. Now, some people are saying, well, I don't do devotions in the morning because I'm not a morning. I don't care when you do devotions. I don't care if you do them on your lunch break. I care that you do them. But I think when the process of this thing of like, well, I have to lead family devotions and I don't know how to preach. I don't know how to dissect the Word of God. I don't think it's as important. And I know that there's an importance of being able to read and convey. But I think a lot of times it's, if you are doing your own devotions, which you should be doing your own devotions, what you should be doing to start is, this is what God is teaching me. What are your thoughts on that? How can I help my kids know that I'm not presenting all of my sins before them per se, but what I am doing is that God's working in my heart about surrender. God's working in my heart about obedience. God's working in my heart about being kind in the words that I speak to you, and almost like calling them to like, hey, I'm not perfect, but I need accountability because I'm human and I'm trying to do right. What it's going to do is create a discussion, because here's the deal. If you tell your kids that you're working on something, I'm working on the time that I spend and being a steward of my time, and then you get on video games that night, guess what they're going to say? Dad, are you doing? They're going to call you, and it's an opportunity for a conversation. Because again, if your lifestyle, your conversation is about the gospel, it's the way you live is going to be more important than what you are telling them to live. Because a lot of times we do this thing where we present like, okay, kids, obey your parents and Lord, for this is right, and that's going to help me, right? No, this is what God's doing in my heart, and this is where I'm being convicted. Is God working in your heart? Or here's a Bible passage. What does this mean to you? And I don't care if you start. We are in a world. I mean, I'm YouTube certified. Like we've got resources at our fingertips galore, even within our own network here at the Men After God. We got resources for you as fathers just to start. So I guess the question is, what is your excuse? What's the story you're telling yourself? But more is, if you're going to go through the Proverbs of the day and just say, okay, we're going to read this together. It's going to take 7 minutes to read a chapter of the Bible. And each of you are going to pick out the verse of your favorite verse today. And some of those chapters are harder to find a verse, like, Proverbs chapter 7, stuff like that. It's just a different passages. But the concept is start somewhere. So whether you're starting in Proverbs, or whether you're starting in the New Testament and the stories of Jesus and going through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, wherever you're starting, start somewhere. When I was a kid, and I'll throw this back to you in a second here. When I was a kid, my mom read us through the whole book, the whole Bible, every day for school. Now, we were homeschooled, so again, schedule stuff is different, but we also read at night, and she would literally read. We read through all of from the beginning, and what we would do is she had color papers that she had downloaded and printed that lined up with what she was reading. So in Genesis, we were doing pictures on the Garden of Eden and man's sin, and then we did Noah's Ark. We were just, and as young kids, we were just coloring pictures while she's reading to us. Some of my favorite memories of the Bible are because at a very young age, I learned the story that built the need for Jesus later on. So opportunity is starting somewhere, but just what is God teaching you? And then facilitate a conversation. Don't preach the Bible to them, live the Bible to them, and then ask really good questions, engage them, like get the conversation flowing. How does this apply to you? How does this apply to your school? How does this apply in your classroom? How does this apply with your teacher? How does this apply with your chores? In what way because it's applicable today to a young kid as much as it's applicable to us.
Absolutely. You mentioned something there of like, don't preach the Bible to them, live the Bible to them. I still say I'm afraid that with all that we've seen in the advances of Bible colleges and universities and Christian education, even, from the K-5 through 12 level, we've almost turned the Bible into an academic exercise. And I get it. However, we have to be careful. It can't be only academic. Because academics is for the purpose of learn, regurgitate, but it's not up until, and I mean, if anyone else's experience is different than mine, let me know. I mean, I did grow up in the backwoods, East Tennessee. So it wasn't until really, at the higher levels of my bachelor's and then especially into my master's and then now a doctorate, it's like read, memorize, regurgitate. And then in the higher levels, you are finally at like apply, when the Bible is more of just apply. Because I tell people all the time, there was a time where people didn't have Bibles in their homes. So how were they growing in their relationship with God? And then, Luke, you mentioned all the resources, different things, and obviously we're a fan of them. We produced them, and we were glad to have them. However, we don't want to create content zombies. That's what happens with a lot of resources out there. So it's why we offer the coaching that we do. But don't take and just absorb till you're a full sponge and you're not doing anything with it, right? You got to let that out and let it release and live it out. So maybe it's take in less and apply more. So instead of reading a chapter a day, read 5 verses a day and maybe a couple days in a row until you finally get it. Yeah. Devotions always come with Bible reading and prayer. Those kind of always go together, right? And it's one of those things, like you said it, Luke, you can do it in the morning, you don't have to do it at your lunch break, you can read this time, you can pray that time, whatever it is. It's just an important spiritual discipline, right? And we do want to model that to our kids. We want to model it to our spouses. It helps with, whenever we take Philippians 4:6 and kind of live that out. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Now, I've never met a single person that is not anxious about something, or at least an initial response is a little bit of anxiousness, right? Now, I've met people that can go headstrong through that. I've met people that have crumbled under it, but I've never met someone who is void of anxiousness. I'm afraid, Luke, that we take this passage and we hear, I'm not supposed to be anxious ever, rather than seeing Paul looking at someone going, hey, you don't have to be anxious about that. You don't have to be anxious about anything because of this good thing. So it's not a command of don't be anxious, don't experience anxiousness. It's when you are experiencing anxiousness, go to God in prayer with gratitude and present your requests to him so he can handle it. And modeling prayer is really, again, living it out. It's not just, okay, guys, bow your heads. Lord, thank you for the day, give us grace, give us good rest, see you tomorrow. It's modeling your faith in God for the situations of life and things you're encountering. There's one situation I know of with a guy I know. I can't even call him a friend, but someone I've interacted with a few times. He got diagnosed with, he hasn't been diagnosed yet, dang fever. I can't remember what it's called, but lots of medical issues and stuff there, and the family is just praying and calling on prayer. And today, as of this recording, there was a great update that was delivered, but they're modeling that prayer for their kids. Now that's a big situation, but what do you do in the small situations of life? And do you talk to your kids about it, and not just leading them in prayer? Let them lead in prayer. Man, you want to hear your kid's heart? Let them pray.
Yeah. I think it's crucial. I think there's so much you just said there for us to really look at, because again, we look at other people's lives and we see it modeled sometimes. We're like, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I had that much faith, right? A lot of times faith is not found in big things. It's already been applied. It's just revealed in the big things. And so when we're looking at, especially with our children, if we're teaching them to pray by praying really, really long, loquacious prayers that sound real perfect, and our God, thou art in heaven, and would thou us please, we're praying in a different vernacular than our kids are used to. Yeah. We're not teaching them to pray to their Abba Father. We need to teach our kids to go to God like they come to us. My kids have zero qualms about interrupting anything I'm doing to ask for whatever they want. Like the other day, I'm in a meeting with my boss at a scenario, and we're having a serious conversation. And my 12-year-old daughter walks in the room through a closed door, and showing me pictures of her stepmom and my wife, and like, hey, I got these pictures, and she's not gonna like them, and she's just having fun, right? And my boss is laughing because again, my daughter doesn't. She knows who he is, but the concept is she has no problem walking in because I'm her dad. And when you're teaching your kids to pray, it's modeled by you talking to God like he's your father, not like he's your authority, though he is, not like he's your judge, though he is, not that he's not holy. You're talking to him like, okay, God, I love you. I need you. Thanks for being my friend. Like, we communicate to God in prayer in a way that's too distant for our kids to like, okay, well, I can't ever pray like that. Well, they do it every day to you. So how do you teach them to talk to God like they would talk to you in a place of, they can walk boldly into the throne of grace? I mean, what a privilege we have to go to the Lord in prayer, and yet we don't do it in front of them the way that God really wants us to. So how are they going to learn it? And then if you take that the next step of like, if we are teaching our kids to pray for specific things, I think Dr. Shetler says, don't pray hazy, lazy, or crazy, right? Like be specific, don't be lazy about it, and then don't be crazy about it. Don't make it for yourself, make it about the glory of God. But the bottom line is this: if we teach them and model that prayer life, when we get to a place where there's a family crisis, when grandma passes away, when something tragic happens, I'm going to go back, and again, I know we got a lot to cover, but when my wife passed away in 2000, my first wife passed away in 2023 last year, the hardest conversation I've ever had is to tell my 4 kids in the hospital that mommy's not coming home. Yeah. And that's a difficult conversation to have. And I think there's a special privilege we have when we're going through hard times, where God has trusted us with an extreme amount of what could be potential anxiety or potential worry, and we can walk out and say, no, God's got this. And even if he doesn't answer the prayer that we're praying, he's going to answer. He's still God, and he still loves us. And guess what? He knows what's better. There's a better yes. And we had prayed for years for Alicia for some health issues that she was dealing with to be healed. And to be honest, God answered those prayers because Alicia's healed. She's in heaven. All that stuff. My children know that, not because of me, but because of the goodness of God. There's been a lot of people who can say, wow, God has been good to me, Luke Sorensen, and he has. So in the process of it, before we get to the tragic situation where there's a hospital bed and an ambulance and all the things in life that happen, let's pray now so that when they get there, they're not devastated when God doesn't suddenly answer their prayer like Santa Claus. Because what we're doing is we're teaching them that God is at our beck and call, and he's not. And that's when it comes down to the worship of a holy God and how we're modeling prayer.
That modeling is so important. not just in the big times. It is those crisis of faith, if you will, that can draw us closer to the Lord. However, our closeness to God, I've quoted him before, and I'll say it a lot. You're as close to God as you want to be.
Right.
And your kids are going to see that. Your wife is going to see that on a day-to-day basis. One thing my wife and I have talked about is there's times where we've had to live off each other's faith, right?
That's good.
And oftentimes, again, Luke knows me better than most. Oftentimes, I'm the one who can say, "Hey, I have no clue how it's going to work out, but it's going to work out and we'll be okay."
Sure.
And my wife's like, "Okay, that's great." In fact, she just told me, we were just talking last night, because, we got some news and it is what it is.
Yeah.
But she's like, you're seeing this and how it's going to be this great, amazing, wonderful thing. And she thinks I'm just this hopeless optimistic all the time. And I am, I truly am. I get it to the point of ignorance now. And I've got some work to do on that. But she's like, I want to know how's it going to work next month? How's it going to work the month after that? I'm like, I don't know, we'll figure it out, And so, but then there's times where I've had to rely on her faith in God as some things, and she's had to be that voice in my ear. And so, again, and our kids see that. We talk about it in front of them. And it's very important to live out that faith daily. If you are only reading the Bible, praying, having your relationship with God privately, then don't be surprised if your kids don't understand that you're actually a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
Barna Group study showed that 85% of young adults raised in Christian homes say the faith of their parents was a significant influence on their own faith. 85%. Now hear this. The study said it was a significant influence on their own faith. It doesn't say if that faith is successful. It does, and I say successful, if they're still in the faith, if they've left the faith. We just have to understand that most of our children are going to be majorly influenced by how we live out our faith. And here's an important thing. I'll toss it to Luke on this one. I believe your relationship with God is different than everyone else's. Now, it's not to say that someone else can't have the same relationship, but just you're made differently. Your relationship with your Heavenly Father is different. He's not different. Don't hear that. He's not different, but you are different than everyone's around you. And your children might be different from you. So when Luke was talking about prayer and praying, some of you are praying to God as, again, your Heavenly Father and the relationship you have with them. You got to discover how your kids are going to have that relationship with them. Now, again, this is not based upon experience. This is based on Bible and truth and things of that nature, but their interaction, their way to communicate and their way to live that out. So Luke, talk about that and go to what you were going with there, the individual relationship we have with God and it being modeled out.
Yeah, I think that I oftentimes want to develop the relationship with God for my children through me.
That's good. Yeah. Okay,
and it's easy to get caught in the trap. And I believe the devil would have us get caught in the trap because he's going to distract us from the priority of, I do not get to walk with God for my children. I get to walk with God for me. I get to model it. And I think to go back to that 85% of people saying, hey, by the way, yeah, I was influenced by my parents' religious beliefs and behaviors. Some good, some bad. Some have walked away from God because their parents were such hypocrites about the standards and talk about provoking their children to wrath through rules and regulations and less relationship with, and made religion a God versus a relationship with God. And I think that the privilege that we have and that we really need to step back is that I'm going to model it. I'm going to facilitate it. I'm going to lead it, but I'm not going to control it. I need to be aware that if there are rules with no relationship, it's going to cause a whole lot of damage, and that's where we come to this thing called church hurt. It's actually not. Don't get me wrong; like, it's a whole different subject. I'm not saying that churches have not hurt individuals, and there's not some accountability that needs to be had. Believe me, it's there. I'm saying a lot of people have become a victim in the process of not having that relationship that they can lean in and have a solid foundation. I think the very unique privilege that we have is understand that we don't get to control our children or our wife. We get to lead them. And the best way to lead someone is to love them unconditionally. And you say, well, what if they're doing wrong? People are going to do wrong. You need to discipline your children. You need to spank your children. Like, there's a whole bunch of Bible in that, but there's a point where they're not a child anymore. So bring them up as they're supposed to when they're young, teach them the disciplines, but don't do the whole, like, okay, we're going to dress up for church and be fake on Sunday and then be villains the rest of the week because we don't put God first. We're going to worship everything else in the world and then go back to church on Sunday and smile and pretend like we're perfect Christians. Well, you don't even need to pretend you're perfect because you're not and everyone knows it. So stop acting like it. But especially to your children need to see the vulnerability, authenticity, and the relationship that you have with your God. But that's your relationship with God. Model that. Show them the benefit of it. Show them how much you rely on God, because that's what's going to be when they're going through a hard time. They're going to say, "Wow, when Dad and Mom were anxious, they were thankful." And that is what removed the anxiety, was they focused on what God had done for them and what God was doing for them instead of what they were going through at the time. That is a privilege that most of us don't pick up and carry, in the sense of, I need to, you talk about end time stuff, and I'm worried for my kids and the politics and all the stuff that's going on. And, how are my kids going to survive in a world that's crazy? The same way we did through faith in God. I don't get to take away what's going on in the world. I get to make sure my children are ready for whatever is in the world. I don't get to prevent them from being killed for their faith. I get to make sure they have faith if that were to happen. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely, man. And that is a whole other discussion that we are going to have to do an episode on. I will say this though. I think too often you talk about fear for our kids and different things of that nature. Honestly, it's the safest time to be alive. Like, your likelihood of being murdered is so low. Now, if you live in Chicago, that's a different story. But overall, in the we'll find a resource for you on that one. But anyways, there was a study shown, and I can't remember it, but where I found it, but I remember reading on it, and it was that people are more afraid now than they were like 300 years ago. But you go back to 300 years ago, and you were more likely to be killed for just random stuff, and you aren't making it past 35. We're living to 70, 80, 90 years old. We're afraid we're dying tomorrow. And I think a lot of it, fear mongering, the media, we can, again, another podcast for another day. But there's so many things that play into that, where if we take a step back and realize God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of faith, and we live from our faith in God rather than our fear in the world and what's going on around us, that's how we model to our children. That's how we raise them up, looking for the Christ, not the Antichrist. And that is how we help them have a relationship with God, rather than an opposition to the world. I think I'm okay. All right, guys, rant time. When we raise our children to be oppositional to the world that God has created and the people that he's called us to reach, we are creating little monsters that are going to see themselves as better than those that are out there, or unable to relate and connect with someone. And not telling you they need to have friends from all across the spectrum or spend a lot of time with people that are negatively influencing them. I am telling you they have to understand that they have their faith in God, they have their faith in Christ, and these things going on in the world, they're going to happen, whether we like it or not. But if we raise them not with fear but with faith, then they can connect, they can relate, they can be around people, they can have conversations, and they can share the gospel with them verbally as they're living it. But if we create them to be oppositional rather than faithful followers, I think there's I should research that a little bit, right on it, but that's a big difference there, by raising someone to be oppositional to the world rather than opposite of the world. Let's say it that way.
Right. I think as parents, as we're leading, being a spiritual leader, is I think Dustin said it so well, teaching our children to know the voice of the shepherd versus looking for the wolf. If I can trust the voice of the shepherd when I am walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Notice it says when, not if. No, I'm going to walk through the valley of shadow of death. And if I can teach my kids how to walk through the valley of shadow of death, like the rod and his staff, his rod of correction and his staff for protection are going to be right there with me. I'm now eyes on the Savior, so I can recognize what's priority versus what is fear, what is true, not true, versus that. Teaching them so much truth that they can. It's like bankers when they're counting money. They don't teach bankers like people and teach them with working with money. They don't teach them. They don't teach them with counterfeit. They don't teach them to look for the counterfeit. They teach them how to feel the real. And that's a lot of what we're doing, is saying, okay, this is authentic. This is real. This is vulnerable. This is growth. This is spiritual. This is painful. This is anxiety. And this is gratitude. And this is how we could fight anxiety, is with gratitude and giving thanks for what God's done. We teach them the truth so that when the counterfeit shows up, they're like, that doesn't feel right. Throw that in the garbage,
Yeah.
right? Oh, real,
Yeah.
real, real. Oh, that's not true. That's a lie. And they'll spot it in the media. They'll spot it in their YouTube consumption. They'll spot it in what someone says at school. And they'll be stronger, but also with the truth and love aspect, where they are taught with love, by love, to recognize love and truth, but understand how to deliver truth and love. I don't have to agree with everybody to love everybody. I don't got to align with everybody to be kind to everybody. And that's an opportunity that if you don't model, they're not going to pick it up if you tell them to be kind to people and you aren't kind to people in how you talk about them behind their back. It's just a painful truth.
Yeah, because they're hearing you. Whether you think they're in the room or not,
They
they're
are
hearing
taking
you.
notes.
Absolutely. You know, I want to hit on something there, and then I'm going to move on to our practical things that we can give you here. There's a lot of things you can do where you don't. Let me say it this way. Luke said you don't have to agree with someone to love them. You don't have to understand someone fully to love them. I think too often we're trying to like figure them out before I can make a determination. No. You love them. You love them. Then you can grow in your understanding, but you love them. And well, they think differently than me. Okay, great. So do I. They have a different opinion than me. I've got 5 of them, and I'm right on every one of them, and they're all opposite of one another. So you know what I'm saying? We can love without understanding. We can love without agreement, and it looks different. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the other thing with the dumbing down of the English language, if you will. We have one word for love. But you look at other languages, and there's so many more descriptive ways of describing it. So, but guys, what do you do now? You know you need to be the spiritual leader in your home. I had a great session I taught at the Men of Valor Conference in summer of 2024 about leading your wife holistically as a whole follower of Jesus. And I know you have different situations. I know that you have different dynamics at play in your relationship. We talked about leading your wife in prayer there, and a guy came up to me afterwards and he said, well, my wife grew up and was taught that she can't, the husband's to always lead. So she won't pray in front of me because she sees that as her leading me. And she doesn't want to usurp the authority in things. And now we had a great discussion on that. And ultimately what I came down to is I said, well, let's look back at that and ask, is she usurping authority or is she living under your authority and you saying, hey, I want you to pray with me? And so I haven't followed up to see how that discussion went. I hope it went well. But ultimately I said, well, ask her if she'll write her prayers down for you. Because he really wanted to hear his wife's heart and he would share his with her. And so that was just a great teaching moment there. But how can you be the spiritual leader in your home? Well, first off, find a time on your schedule within the next 2 weeks to have a family devotion. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that has to look like because it needs to look like what works best for your family. You might find that your family does absolutely terrible if you try to read a book of the Bible, but they might do really well if you grab that Answers in Genesis 5-minute Bible study book, right? So whatever works for you. Maybe you're not musically inclined. Like I can't carry a tune in a bucket. So maybe you're not going to sing. Okay, great. But can you talk about the things God's doing in your life? And then lead in prayer. Lead in prayer during that time, or if you can, daily. That's wonderful. My family and I, we always pray before bed at night. I'll ask one of our kids to pray, and I let them have some of those little silly prayers. God, thank you for the day. Thank you for what you do for us. Give us a good night's rest. Let's have a great day at school. Amen. And I will look at them like, that's how we talk to God? Are you sure? Okay. All right. Well, you have a good night. And I leave it. Because that's between them and the Lord, but I'm pointing it out like, hey, there's a little bit more there, you know. And then when I pray, I try to model the prayer life I want them to have there, and then model your Christ-like behavior. Luke, I'm going to throw it back at you to talk about modeling Christ-like behavior and those maybe a practical way to have an open conversation. But I want to lead into it with this. One of my best tips that I can give you for modeling Christ-like behavior is when you're wrong. When you do something wrong to your children or negatively impacts your children, it was a mistake, you didn't mean to, you blew up, whatever it was, you need to apologize to your children. Yeah. Have that humility. Go back and say, hey, guys, Dad doesn't want to be that guy. Dad messed up. I'm sorry. And I've done, too many times to count. I've had to go and apologize to my kids. And they know that. They know Dad's not perfect. And I'll tell them. The only thing I tell them is Dad's not a liar. Now, I'm not perfect, but I don't lie to them. And then they'll look at me and go, okay, but you said you'd put this up in my room. Like, okay, I didn't lie. I forgot. All right. Huge difference. Huge difference. Put it on my schedule. I'll get it done. Right. But Luke, talk about that, just how to model that behavior in those open conversations.
Yeah. I really think it does come down to, we can talk about, I have a 12-year-old and I feel like I'm always trying to win her over. Now we have a great relationship, but I do believe that it comes down to very rarely will, and her personality is different than mine. She doesn't ever look for the good in me. Now, I'm sure she sees it. I'm sure that there's things that she's like, okay, that's a good dad, but she's not looking for good dad. She wants good dad. She'll probably enjoy it. But what she finds or highlights is the flawed personality or flawed person that I am. And sometimes it's in sarcasm, sometimes it's in humor, sometimes it's serious. And I think that our opportunity in presenting and literally what Dustin said and living out is when we're wrong, because we're not always right, take a moment to say, I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I know that hurt you. And a lot of times we want to like, I didn't mean to hurt you. And here we want to give our intentions. That doesn't matter. Hey, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I know that hurt you, irrelevant of intentions. And here's what I'm going to do to try to change that behavior. What I'm doing is not telling them that I made a mistake, because most of the time they already know that I made a mistake. I'm just telling them that I made a mistake so that they know that I made a mistake, that I know that I made a mistake, right? So the concept of it is just when you model it, I'll tell this brief story. I know we're short on time, but and this is more of just a modeling example. My father-in-law was, after my wife passed away, he was at our house for a bit with my mother-in-law. He was doing some things, helping where he lived in a rental, and in the process of it, something had got tracked through the house, and I thought it was a crayon. And he had gotten on the kids, some of my young boys, about, hey, guys, you got to watch this. We're trying to get, and it was just, he got on their case, and it wasn't bad. He wasn't mean. He was just correcting them, right? And then he realized that he had been doing some work in the kitchen, had got something in his shoe. It was actually him tracking around this little white marker, which was actually sheetrock. Now, immediately he was mortified, and this is the example. I'm not talking about him getting on the kids. It was a mistake. But immediately he went and got all three boys lined up and said, "Hey, boys, I want you to know I got on you about this. I want to say I'm so sorry. I want you to forgive me because I made that mistake, and that was my and I blame." And ask forgiveness from each of them individually. Now, to be honest, their young kids are like, of course we forgive you, Papa, don't care. But the example that he set to them was, if I'm going to blow it, I'm going to own it. And it wasn't a big mistake. It wasn't a big situation. But what he modeled there for me, what he modeled there for my boys, was when you make a mistake, whether you intended to or not, if it messed with somebody, you deal with it, irrelevant of what your intentions were. Apologize, make it right, move on. Modeling it is going to be modeled in your failures. That's where they're going to see it. Very rarely they're going to see you be successful and need to model something other than humility, and you need to. But in your failures is your opportunity to, okay, this is how would Jesus respond. Now, the cool thing is Jesus didn't fail and wasn't, but our opportunity is to own up where we can and respond like Jesus would.
Man, I love that. That is great. Guys, some extra resources for you if you want to go check them out. Family Worship by Donald Whitney. And then apps, the Bible app that I'm sure you have on your phone. If you don't, go ahead and download that from life.church. And they've got the Bible app for kids. I believe it's inside of the Bible app. You can actually grab that. There's devotions for them. They can use your phone, or you put a tablet and things like that. And then also check out Focus on the Family. They've got excellent content and guidance there. And of course, with Men After God, as we're continuing to grow and develop the content that we've got coming out, we have a 30-day Love Your Spouse Challenge that we'll be coming out with January, February time frame to help you guys out with that. And then we'll come out with things for fathers and stuff as well. And then don't forget, head over to our website, menaftergod.net, to get connected with us there. If you're a men's ministry leader interested in our men's ministry growth accelerator program that we have launched this month, we'd love to talk to you about it. And if you're at a church that doesn't have a men's ministry, we'd love to talk to you about how to develop, grow, and revitalize a men's ministry if you need to. Connect with us, Men After God, on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/Men After God. Guys, being a man after God is not about being a perfect man. It's about being a pursuing man. So continue pursuing after God, model it for your family, and be the spiritual leader He's called you to be. Have a great week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Men After God podcast. We hope today's discussion has encouraged and equipped you on your journey. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions, comments, or would like to partner with us, please reach out at support@menaftergod.net. Stay connected with our community by liking our Facebook page at facebook.com/menaftergodpodcast. For deeper engagement, join our group at facebook.com/groups/menaftergod and connect with other men pursuing God's heart. If you found value in this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more men striving to live faithfully. Until next time, stay strong in the faith and continue pursuing after God.